here's the deal: is that there's Razorback football that's going on, but there's a lot of Razorback basketball that still seems to be the topic of conversation for everybody. And one person that knows a little bit about it actually wrote a really great article on CBS Sports dealing with John Calipari and the Razorback basketball team. It is a good friend who it's been a while since we've had him on. And it is our guy, Brandon Marcello of 24/7 Sports, but also CBS Sports, joining us here. And Brandon, appreciate you joining us, man. How you doing this afternoon?
Doing well, man. How are you, John?
Well, I'm doing pretty good myself, especially considering the fact that basketball is a little bit more relevant, a little bit more fun right now. It wasn't for a while, and then it became that. And I know that you mainly cover college football and everything, but I had a chance to check out what you wrote on CBS Sports dealing with Cal, because I remember we were texting last week. I guess you're like, "Hey, I'm going to be covering the basketball game against Mississippi State." I was like, "Okay, well, something go wrong here? What's Brand Marcello doing over there covering basketball?" But just your overall thoughts and what the basis of your article and getting the story behind Cal and the years and what's been going on. Just what went into that, and what was the type of vibe that you got in those interviews of talking with Cal and other people too?
Yeah, we've been thinking about doing something legitimately for like the last couple of months, just on the first year under Cal, and obviously back there in late January, we're like, oh boy, is this a story about the Cal experience just being a complete failure and maybe in its last days as far as just a Hall of Fame coach kind of at the edge of his career. But and especially considering, there was an article out there from anonymous coaches across the country, including the SEC, that were criticizing John Calipari and saying that the game had passed him by and all this stuff. So it really just kind of put the microscope even more on this story. And so we kind of bumped it down, kept bumping it. And obviously with Arkansas starting to win, it became much more interesting. And adding to that was the fact that Arkansas is obviously shorthanded. They've gone from a 9-man rotation down to 7, and even that 7-man rotation isn't even completely healthy. And so just one of those things where it's like, let's wait till the end of the season, regular season, see where they're at. And what better time than now with them playing potentially for kind of a play-in game against Mississippi State in that season finale in Bud Walton Arena. So I went there and covered it, and got to sit down and chat with John Tyson, actually courtside seats at halftime, sat down with him and chatted for a bit about everything that's happened this season and what the future looks like. I thought it was some interesting comments about just how this idea of giving NIL deals to 9 players and that just kind of being your rotation was good in theory, but wasn't necessarily great in practice, because obviously Arkansas dealt with the injuries. They've been shorthanded, and even the chemistry has been kind of slow to develop as a result of all that. And they finally seem to have something going now. But the problem is that they're still shorthanded, and these guys are really in great shape, but you can't keep playing kind of at a half tank of gas, right? And if Arkansas were to get on a roll in the postseason, you wonder if that would be the case, if they just run out of gas, which makes this SEC tournament so interesting. It's like if you win a few games, is that even a good thing? Because you might be wearing yourself out before the NCAA tournament. And so talked to Coach Cal a little bit and John Tyson for quite a bit, and about kind of their plans, recruiting wise going into next year and how they're going to handle NIL and everything. And it was pretty fascinating chatting with them.
So let me ask you this: dealing with, because I think Razorback fans feel like this has just been a roller coaster for years. You'll never even be able to explain to people just how the hype and the expectations coming in, and how it took a back seat. But then you beat Michigan, but then the conference play started up and it was rough. But then you go on the road to beat Kentucky. I mean, it's just been all over the place. But you talked about the roster and the job that Cal's doing, sitting there at 8-10, which I know is not going to just wow the entire world of that type of record. But what has been maybe the key of him being able to get the success and get into the NCAA tournament, which it looks like they're at right now? How is he able to do it with a team that started 1-6 in conference play, and without doubt is the toughest the SEC has ever been, to now where you're talking about an SEC tournament and NCAA tournament that Arkansas may be a team that nobody really wants to play right now?
Yeah, he's managed to get the pieces all kind of flow together and play together. And I think it was DJ Wagner Saturday mentioned that sometimes we had a lot of great talent is kind of what they said, but it was hard to kind of everybody to figure out their roles and kind of keep people happy. And then it was almost a blessing in some ways that a couple of guys got injured and the rotation shrank a little bit, and they were able to focus and actually work on sets and kind of get a chemistry and groove going. Because remember, all these guys are all playing together for the first time, really, despite it being a trio of Kentucky transfers, where you're dealing with all these new pieces. So in a way, that kind of helped them. I think what's been very impressive with Coach Cal this year from a personal standpoint is that you're dealing with all these injuries. You're also dealing with players who are dealing with injuries as they're playing, including Nelly Davis, whose wrist had been bothering him, and even when he was playing was obviously affecting his shots. He was able to keep them together. I mean, it's so very easy for a lot of these guys, especially the ones that could go to the NBA, to just check out and go, I'm done with this. I'm going to prepare for my future and everything. But these guys have played very hard. DJ Wagner, I think, has been incredible just in how hard he's been playing throughout this season. And he's gotten them to believe. Also, as just a schematic situation, I've watched a few Arkansas games this year, not all of them, obviously. But I recall I was at a friend's house. We were watching the Auburn game, and the inbound plays were fantastic that Cal was drawing up or preset or whatever, and they were getting baskets on it, really confusing that great Auburn defense on the road. And you just kind of knew that there was still something there. And you saw that fight in the Alabama game where they got down big, but then made it a game late when everybody was leaving the building. And it's just a team that doesn't really ever give up down the stretch. It's just that maybe they don't have enough pieces to be as good as what they could have been this year. But that doesn't discount the fact that Coach Cal has done a pretty great job in figuring out everything with what he has right now. And I think if you put truth serum and Coach Cal right now, he would say, yeah, it was a mistake, only bringing in 9 guys and then kind of bringing out some, ancillary pieces that aren't getting NIL deals. And, John Tyson told me that the idea now is that we're going to get 10 or 11 guys now, probably 11, maybe even more. And they're also going to be helped with the revenue sharing aspect of everything. And, John was telling me that, he thought there was probably like 12 to 14, I think is the number he said, programs that were well set up for this year as far as NIL and everything. And Arkansas was among them. And the roster they built proves that. I mean, they had the number 1 recruiting class, and I think number 4 in the transfer portal rankings. But the problem was they just didn't have the numbers. Now, going into this year, this next upcoming season, he thinks there'll probably be between 20 to 30 programs that will be on that level, that elite level, competing for championships because of NIL and also the revenue sharing. And so Arkansas has got to kind of step its game up. And as John Tyson was telling me, this wasn't a one-year plan. They've kind of planned this out over the next 2 to 3 years. But now they've had to change things a little bit where they know they've got to bring in a couple of other pieces there so that it's like a 10 or probably 11-man rotation more so than just counting on 9 guys. And if you have 2 guys go down, oh boy, you're scrapping near the bottom of the barrel.
So I think it's so fascinating when you got a chance to talk with Tyson, because I don't know if you've ever felt this way, but the fact that you're here talking to a major booster and a guy that runs chicken, and you're talking about we got to get this plan in place for getting players in and paying them NIL. I mean, it's just so crazy how it's gone. But just the vibes. I know you mentioned a few things you talked about, but just the vibes and the conversation. He's a big basketball fan, but the dude was the hero of getting Cal to Arkansas. But when you got to sit down with him and talk to him, just how is his approach? And you mentioned the plan and everything. How much is his involvement in the basketball program? Because I just assume dude's out here wheeling dealing. Is it as involved as what people think, or what can you make of that right now?
I think he's pretty involved. He's obviously very knowledgeable when it comes to basketball. He was talking about player rotations with me and comparing it to some situations that some NBA teams specifically are dealing with. And I don't follow the NBA, so I had no idea what he's talking about. He's talking about how Oklahoma City has changed their ways, their philosophy of increasing rotation with a younger team. Golden State also increasing the rotation. And then he used another team like the Knicks, where they've gone kind of the opposite way, and it's really directly negatively affected them. And he says in this day and age, in college basketball and even pro basketball, you got to have 10 or 11 guys that are starter worthy that you can rotate in and out. You can't rely on 9 guys, and especially not 7 or 8 like Arkansas is dealing with right now. As far as like his day-to-day, hands on things? I'm not certain, but it's very clear to me that he's a guy that Coach Cal leans on. I mean, they're good buddies. We all know that. I mean, John Tyson is as big of a Hog fan as I think you'll find. I was watching him before I sat down with him at halftime, and yeah, you were there. They had that race with the corgis
Yeah.
at midcourt, and he was going nuts. He was cheering those pups on, and like it just and everything, and leading hog calls and everything on the sideline during the game, high fiving everybody. I mean, he's just an Arkansas boy at heart that just so happens to be a billionaire. And now that he's got the coach that he can really relate with and talk with, whenever he needs to and pick up the phone, and they got a similar philosophy when it comes to business and how to run a business. And that's what basketball programs, and for that matter, any athletic department has become now. It's a business where you're dealing with an unofficial salary cap in a lot of ways with the money you have for NIL. And it's very clear to me that, it appears Arkansas has appeared to put them in a position to where they're probably gonna have to spend more money next year, and they're ready for it. I spoke to Hunter Yurachek, the AD, as well, Saturday, and he was telling me that, I didn't hire, Coach Cal to bring him in here and not give him the tools to be successful. When I asked him about the increase in NIL and obviously with revenue sharing. So certainly Arkansas is going to be in a good position moving forward into next year to pick up some of these extra pieces that they're going to need from the portal, but also among high school recruits. John was saying that, at face value at this point, that 10th and 11th guy, they're not going to be, superstar players, but they might be players that develop into superstars. So if you go get a portal player, go get yourself a portal player that will be there for 2 years. And you can convince and say, if you come here, play 2 more years, we'll get you to the NBA. Same with a freshman. If you get a freshman there, say, hey, come here for 2 years, maybe 3 years, and we'll develop you. It's not going to be a one and done player, whether it's a high school recruit or a transfer portal player, when you talk about the 10th and 11th guys they add with that NIL money that they're gathering.
Speaking with Brandon Marcello of CBS Sports, who wrote a great article dealing with John Calipari and behind the scenes of the basketball program. And I think that's what's fascinating, Brandon, is, Cal obviously shocked the world becoming the next head coach at Arkansas. But knowing that, hey, he was 65 years old when he took the job. And, some people felt like, his prime is past. He did it at Kentucky, but they wanted him out of there. He seems to have the tools. He seems to have the program. He seems to have still a willingness and a very much of a fire to win at a high level. So what do you see in the next 5 years with Cal, not only at Arkansas, but given the SEC and the state of it and how competitive it is? Can he be a guy that wins a championship at Arkansas in the next 5 years or goes to a Final Four? Just what do you feel like the big picture is going to be for Cal here over the next few seasons at Arkansas?
Yeah, I think that's all possible. I think it's all on the table because of his pedigree and what he's done in the past, but also just namely, players still win games. Coaches lose them. I've always said that. But especially in basketball, when you're counting on, 9, 10 guys to get you there, it's so much more of a microscope under everything. And every little coaching decision is magnified as a result of that, especially in these close games you're seeing more and more often now in the SEC. I think Arkansas is going to be able to attract the top tier talent like we've seen just in the first year under Coach Cal. As I mentioned, they had a number 1 recruiting class and a top 5 transfer class just in his first year when he's putting everything and cobbling everything together late. They're going to have similar recruiting classes, obviously, going into the next year and the year after that. I think the key here, though, is having some consistency. So where you're not turning a roster over every year, because if you look across the SEC, you look across the nation for that matter, but especially in the SEC this year, the best teams in the SEC this year are the most veteran teams. Auburn won the SEC this year because their average roster age is 23 years old. They got a lot of guys that are older, but also guys that have played together for several years, and that chemistry keeps going. They know how each other think. They know where they're going to be on the court. They know who to trust, who not to trust, who's on the court. Arkansas, obviously, you don't have that right now. But if you get a few of these guys from this team this year to stick around and then bring along the newcomers that come in, whether they're one-and-done players or even some portal guys, then you got something, right? You got something you can build on and obviously be able to count on when it comes to some veteran leadership, so that Coach Cal is not and his assistants aren't necessarily having to go out there and literally move the chess pieces on the floor at times. I remember watching back in, I think it was January or December. I'm not much of a basketball guy now. I just cover college football, but I watch Arkansas from time to time. And I saw them Coach Cal coaching, and it just seemed like every moment he was standing up and like almost on the court, having to tell players where to go and exactly what to do. And I'm just like, this is a mess right now that he's having to do all of this and then working so hard to just get these guys in the right space. And he's not having to do that much anymore. And that's going to be huge going into next year. I mean, just having some guys that stuck around or in the system that can help the other players come around, because right now he's finally able to count on some of these players to do the right thing, but also bring the other players along and coach each other on the floor. Whereas earlier this year, just a few months ago, he wasn't able to do that.
Well, I'm curious because you mentioned you cover college football, and I've made it known. I've been went on Feinbaum and said this, and I've always talked about Cal is a celebrity that happens to be a college basketball coach. I mean, when he came and got the job at Arkansas, I remember people asking me, he's like, "Hey, is there a comparison to this in Arkansas history?" I'm like, "No." Even the Bobby Petrino hire, which was national news coming from the Atlanta Falcons and everything, was nowhere even close to this. So, spending a little bit of time with him, since you're a college football guy and you've talked to so many coaches and covered, is there any comparison that you could make with Cal to a college football coach you covered? Is he Nick Saban like when it comes to the aura and the approach? Is it somebody else? I mean, is there a comparison for somebody like Cal in the college football landscape?
Yeah, I think he's very much like Nick Saban. He's a lot of business, and he's just very regimented when it comes to that. I mean, you're not going to be able to just kind of walk down the hallway and chat with them or whatever. But when you do get to chat with them, he's pretty open and honest with things. And Nick Saban was very much along those lines. It's just that he's got a singular focus on basketball, and I'm going to go do this, and I'm going to go coach that, and then I'm going to go talk to this guy, and I need to be in the office at this moment, and I got to be on the phone at this time. He kind of blocks everything else out. He's got blinders on from that aspect. And I think that's a lot like, Nick Saban. I think it's a lot like a lot of old school coaches, especially in football, that have kind of dealt with this new era. And when you're John, I mean, listen, he's a guy that's been able to bring in all these incredible NBA All-Stars and future NBA superstars, and he's kind of had to build a professional environment anyway. That's his selling point to all these families and these players. And so he treats it as such. So you're not going to see Coach Cal, out having a beer with, a beat writer or someone else, or even doing so with some fans or whatever. He's going to get in and get out and go back to work and kind of do his thing and develop things. And obviously being an active Hall of Famer who's still coaching, how many Hall of Famers do you know out there that's just kind of, still coaching or in the business, just kind of kicking the tires and having fun and playing around a little bit? Those coaches are getting a little bit more rare. But the thing is, like in basketball, I would say this on the other side, a lot more basketball coaches are a little bit more freewheeling and kind of open and just kind of sporadic and willing to kind of do things and just chat with fans. I mean, I was a beat writer at Auburn, and my last season really was that year that Auburn went to the Final Four in 2019. And, Bruce Pearl is as personable as a coach as you'll ever see. And he's a guy that you could call up and talk to almost any time, shoot a text to. Heck, I shot a text to him when they won the SEC a week or two ago, and he texted me back. But not everybody's like that. Everybody's got different personalities, and more people are closed off these days. And, Coach Cal has done things a little bit differently from everybody else. I mean, he's the one who really kind of perfected that one and done model previously. And his whole coaching philosophy has been, I'm going to bring guys in, and I'm going to not just get you to the NBA, but I'm going to prepare you to be a superstar in the NBA, right? And you heard him when he took the Arkansas job that he still has, I don't know what the number was, so many more families that he wants to affect and bring to that level. That's kind of his focus. And I think beyond that is, okay, let's go win championships as well, which if you're not winning, that's not going to set well with fans. But when you're winning, it's all gravy.
Well, I'm going to ask you this too, Brandon, just a few more before I let you get out of here. Some people, and you've been an astute member of the media for a long time, don't necessarily care for the fact that, Cal doesn't always do his press conferences after games. He doesn't always meet with the media in the middle of the week. Some people say he's not as accessible, and maybe it's just because what you're used to, because, previously with Eric Musselman, he was always there for post games, and he was always there in the midweeks, and, you just kind of get used to it. But what are your thoughts as someone who covers teams and whatnot of Cal not always making himself readily available as the head coach post games or even during the week when it comes to press conferences?
If I was a beat reporter, I'd want him at every press conference. I would. So I would get frustrated. I just would. It's I don't know his assistant coaches very much, Kenny Payne and Chin Coleman and all that, but I mean, before a big game or something like that, or even the SEC tournament, to get an assistant coach out there, not the head coach, the authority figure, that would probably bother me a little bit, especially as someone who's trying to write stories. And also, it makes it a little bit maybe unpredictable when you're planning out content as a reporter. Even myself, I went to the Arkansas Mississippi State game, and I was sitting there and even talking to people like, is Cal going to come talk, after the game? Is it possible? If they lose, will he come out and talk? And, not to say my story was hinging on his voice being in there, but it kind of did. I needed his voice in there to give him the opportunity, and I've gone through other channels to try and get Cal off to the side in the middle of the week, but I was told, like, just show up to the press conference, you'll get a question or two in, get what you need. And luckily for me, he showed up. But yeah, that would bother me as our beat reporter, because I've been in situations previously, and this is stuff no one cares about, but it helps build stories and tell better stories and greater stories. And, look across, all the national media and everything. I can count on one hand how many sit down interviews Cal has done since he's been at Arkansas. One. And it was with my colleague Dennis Dodd at CBS Sports. And Cal has really backed off from that stuff here the last few years. I think he's been, I can't speak for him, but I think he's been burned by a lot of people in the past. And if you're in this industry long enough, you're going to be burned. And the only way to kind of protect yourself from that happening is just to pull away and not welcome that or interact with that. So I understand why or why not he may choose to do so and do those things. So that doesn't bother me as from a human perspective, but just as a writer, a writer in a lot of ways represent the fans, and we go ask the questions that fans want answered, right? So some of those can be tough, some of those are fluff questions or whatever. But would you rather get an answer from the assistant coach every time, or would you rather get it from the head coach all the time? It's just a matter of what you think. But for people to I don't know, you tell me, if he's being openly criticized by other fan bases and things like that, that's a weird thing to be criticizing. I mean, criticize the guy for wins and losses. Don't criticize what his record is and showing up to press conferences.
Yeah, that's how I felt about it. I was like, well, if he's winning, no one really cares about it as much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Cal's great and he's a great orator and all that, but there's also not a whole lot sometimes you get from the press conferences, even when he's there. Yeah. He likes to just, answer his own questions as he would. But I think it's just different for what you're used to.
And it also shows that he trusts his assistants to deliver the message of the program. Nick Saban probably didn't want to talk to the media, but he did it all the time and did not allow his assistants to talk because he didn't want to stray away from his message. He didn't want assistants to be caught in something and say something that doesn't align with what Nick Saban's saying backstage and all of that. So, he trusts his guys to go out there and represent the program the way he wants.
Yeah, which again, it'd be nice sometimes we had that in football too. But he may be the only coach that's wants his assistants, to do it all instead of him. Because I don't know many coaches that would do that in any sport, much less college basketball. But I think it's interesting. Just again, what you're used to. I mean, I doubt I'm going to get an invite to the Halloween party for Cal like I did with Muss. But it's it's a thing that people get used to, and as long as you're winning, I think most people are going to be okay with it. But before we let you get out of here, Brandon, I mean, we got to talk some college football. I'm just going to ask you a very general question, and you can just answer how you want. Razorback football spring. What is it? What's the current state? What is the thing about Razorback football in the spring? Because I can't tell you. We talk some football, but when we do, people are like, "Nah, I'm out." It's just such a weird, interesting time for Razorback football right now.
I'm gonna be honest with you. I think it's a lot like that at a lot of programs, including some blue bloods. And the reason for that is because there's just so much turnover now, where you need a full off season and spring football to even know who's on the team and kind of readjust and adjust your expectations. I don't think spring football is as important to fans anymore as far as just the day-to-day. What's the position battle? It's more or less, what are the names? Who do we have here? You got your hardcore fans who are doing so, but not the guys who are going to be there just going, hey, I've got it all figured out. But I think for Arkansas, I think I saw something. I was doing some early research. Arkansas is in the top, I think, 3 or 4 in the SEC as far as new players this spring. So I need to study the roster Is it going to be a better Arkansas team this year? Hell if I know. I don't think the coaches know. They're not going to really even have a good idea on this team until they go through spring practices, get some film together, and start figuring out what a depth chart might look like and what they need to work on when they go through player-led orientation of practices this summer. The big thing, though, is that you've got a good spine to this nervous system with Talon Green obviously being back at quarterback. You've got Bobby Petrino there still calling the offense, and you've got Travis Williams still calling the defense. That's key. You kept some consistency when it came to that, right? They're going to have to rebuild a lot on that defense, I think. Obviously, losing Landon Jackson is humongous. So they got to figure out a way to get pressure on the quarterback different ways this year than they have in the past, potentially. I really like both coordinators. I mean, how can you not? Bobby Petrino is Bobby Petrino. He's going to score points. He proved it last year. He took an offense that was just completely in the dumps a year before and reshaped it, changed it, right? Defensively, T. Will is a guy that's going to try to be aggressive and pick his spots. And I think the defense has been pretty good considering the talent he had on his roster with his unit. So I'm going to need to kind of study things up this spring on Arkansas. You know, reporters were supposed to know all and everything. But the thing is, things are so much different now in the spring because it's like a clean slate. You could throw all these pieces, but you're throwing them in a blender. We don't know how it's going to fit yet. We don't know, it's just not like that. It's not like the NFL where you're bringing in just a few guys, for few free agents. You're bringing in practically a new roster sometimes. Sometimes you're bringing in entirely new rotation of starters along an offensive line or defensive line. And it's just very, very difficult to predict. So I'm interested to maybe walk over there and drive over there and see a couple of these practices. And, obviously we're kind of getting to the point where a lot of schools are finally starting spring practices. And that's when I start getting information from a lot of coaches across the country about what's your team look like? What's this guy look like? Is this guy not quite working out the way you thought? So a lot of things to figure out here over the next month or two.
All I know is that I'm sure no one's going to be over dramatic and think too much of the smallest of things in spring. As soon as Talon Green throws a pick, I'm sure people are going to be completely normal and fine by it. I mean,
well, listen, I always go back to I've covered teams as a beat writer where we always try to look into the spring game a lot. And if I recall, I was at Mississippi State covering Mississippi State, but what that year of the motorcycle thing, didn't Arkansas go score 63 points in their spring game? It's 63-0 or something like that. Everybody's like, oh, this is going to be an SEC championship contending team. Then the motorcycle incident happens. The talent doesn't change, but then nothing came together that year with John L. Smith leading the way and, telling everybody to smile. So there's just no way to read into spring games. Same thing happened at previous programs I've covered. And it was obviously much different then. You knew that the talent that was there on the field was much of the same from the previous year and was going to be the same that going into the August. Now it's half the roster's new going into spring. And then when spring practices end, you're adding more pieces from the transfer portal. So it frustrates the hell out of the coaches. I'll tell you that much, because they feel like they're running on a treadmill underwater. Like they just can't get the full speed. They can never quite figure it out. And they don't figure it out until the very end of fall camp in August.
Yeah, well, it's just for our sake here at Inside Arkansas, let's just hope the basketball team goes pretty far in spring and does really well.
Hey, baseball looks good.
Yeah, hey, they got baseball. Yeah, baseball's good and everything. So, but most with baseball, it's a whole nother animal where their fans are kind of don't care till wake me up at postseason because they've had great seasons the past 2 years, but nothing to show for it postseason. So, it's just how Razorback fans are right now. But either way, folks, be sure to check out Brandon's great article on CBS Sports talking about behind the scenes with John Calipari and what goes on in this season and also the future. You got to sit down with John Tyson. Really good stuff. And Brandon, we always appreciate you joining us. Good talking with you, man. Enjoy the spring practice, but enjoy some basketball. Enjoy a great sports season and the weather getting nicer here in Arkansas, man. And we'll be sure to catch up with you later down the road.
All right. Thanks, John. Appreciate you, man.